Welcome to the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. This season is all about the EOS journey. And who better to talk about the EOS journey than Mark O'Donnell? Mark has several times, more than once or twice, scaled businesses of his own. Obviously, has done his fair share of implementation and is now the CEO of EOS Worldwide. Mark, what's new and exciting in the world of EOS? What's new? What's good?
Yeah, well, it's good to be here. First of all, thanks for having me. With EOS, we have just a privilege to work with entrepreneurs all over the world. We do business in 40 countries. We've got about 900 EOS implementers all around the world. And what's new and good in the world of EOS is, knock on wood, something's working. I mean, entrepreneurs are getting more of what they want from their businesses by implementing the tools, the system, the processes. And it's just a pleasure and a privilege to be part of that. So that's what I'm really excited about. And that's what we're focused on all day, every day.
There's a lot going on in EOS. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, from the beginning of your journey, like how did you get involved with EOS? Like, when did you discover it? And At what point in your corporate career? Like, at what point?
Yeah, so it's a kind of an interesting, funny story. Coming out of school, I went right into pharma and biotech, which was sort of the family business. My dad was in that business. And so I started working at very large pharmaceutical companies. And I worked there for about 5 years or so and decided to start my own entrepreneurial journey with my brother. We built those companies quite quickly. And we started the company in 2007. And, it's really funny because this is pretty much a worse time to start a business. The Great Recession's just getting kicked off. And here we are, I wasn't even 30 years old yet, engineers from big pharma starting an entrepreneurial venture. But I always like to say that entrepreneurism is a little bit of a combination of ignorance and ego. Like you've got the ego to think that you can do it, and you're too ignorant to know that you probably can't. And so we just went right after it and grew the company from the two of us very, very quickly. We made the Inc. 500, 5,000 list, and we just saw all of the issues of the entrepreneurial journey, waiting by the mailbox for payment to come in so you can make payroll and all those different types of things that entrepreneurs do. And 2010, we merged with a company because we just weren't growing fast enough. We were like, this has got to go faster. So we merged with a company. We created what it was called the Azure Group, which is a vertically integrated pharma biotech services business. We ultimately started 23 total companies. 9 of them made it. The rest of them, not so much. And
hey, if that was baseball batting average, you'd be in the Hall of Fame, right?
Pretty darn good.
Little right? Above 300.
Right, just a little above 300. We really were succeeding in spite of ourselves in a lot of ways. And like most entrepreneurs do, right? You're just trying to figure out along the way, you're sort of building the airplane as you're trying to fly it. And it was about 2012 where we had these companies and we're like, there's got to be a way to harmoniously orchestrate the ins and outs of a company, of a bunch of companies. And so I just finished my MBA and I'm like, well, I didn't learn anything there. So I'm like, okay, well, there's got to be something else. I joined Vistage, which is a big peer group organization that serves entrepreneurial leaders and business leaders generally. And we'd have a new book once a month, right? A new book, a new concept, a new tool. And I would dive all into these tools in search of this way of running a company. And it sort of created this flavor of the month thing where I'd go read the book. I'd take to my team, say, hey, we're going to go do this now. And they'd roll their eyes and they're like, okay, he's on some other kick now. And we're going to do business model canvas. We're going to do this. We're going to do that, whatever it is. And so at the same time, I hired a coach of another operating system. It's not really an operating system, but another tool set. And I was like, hey, I think this is it. And I was focused on rocks specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit like the system was too complicated for my team, built of my brother and a bunch of engineers, really. And it was just too difficult, too complex, and they didn't buy into it. Because we did the merger, and so we had 4 partners at the time. And we're doing other roll-ups of other pharma biotech companies. And so I was gaining more partners as I was going. And I was a little bit frustrated. Head coach, I was like, this is just not working. My brother, as I was trying to get him to buy into the concept that I was selling, he finished that book. And it said, you may also like traction. And, Amazon does their recommendation engine. And so he was like, he listened to it on Audible, sends it to me and says, hey, Mark, I think this is what you've been looking for. So I read the first chapter of the book. I did eventually finish it. And so I'm like, oh, this is like every business book I've ever read with templates. And if you're an engineer and you're in pharma, templates, are a pretty big part of what you do. And so I thought it was really simple. And I started having conversations with my partners, and they were willing to try the simple system that was written about in Traction. They were unwilling to do anything prior to that. So I'm like, okay, this is cool.
It's a good start.
So I started self-implementing EOS into my 9 companies. And really at the same time, I met another EOS implementer, which I didn't know existed at the time. Like I read the book and I still didn't know implementers existed.
Okay.
So his name is Jonathan Smith, and I met him at the Pentagon, of all places, having lunch with a 3-star general. And we got to talking. He had a conversation with my business partner, and so he called and said, hey, I do this thing called EOS. And so we obviously knew what was happening. And so we hired Jonathan as our EOS implementer. And I joined base camp and boot camp at the same time, thinking that Jonathan would work on my holding company and I would implement EOS for the other 9 companies that we owned. And so we did that for a while because it felt it was like Dr. Heal Thyself, being self-implementing EOS. I couldn't be the objective person in the room. My leadership team was like, well, you're the owner. Like, we'll just do what you want us to do. Like, no, that's not. Wearing the implementer hat and the self-implementer hat and the owner hat all at the same time just didn't get the results that I wanted. We were making progress. It was good, but it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be.
Yeah. It reminds me of a phrase. It's hard to read the label from inside the bottle.
That's right.
I think a small, not that well-known organization says that often.
Yeah.
I say that tongue in cheek because I stole that from EOS.
Yeah. Well, and that's true. So that's how I came to EOS, was a client, self-implementing, then a client, then an implementer. And when I went to boot camp in 2014, then I had no intention on becoming an implementer, none whatsoever. It was a different world then. It was not a franchise. Right. It was just sort of like $12,000, pay a $400 a month fee, and you're an implementer. Like, okay, fine. But I just fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the culture. I joke that when I first experienced boot camp, which was in Gino Wickman's office, and then QCE at the Westin in Detroit, I was like, either I accidentally joined a cult or I'm home for the first time ever.
Maybe both.
Maybe both. That's right. So I just fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the process and the tools. And then I decided that I would pursue becoming an implementer full time about a year after boot camp, and just kept going from there. I ultimately sold my companies to private equity and my former business partners and became a full-time implementer, then coach, then head coach. And then in 2020, after Mike Payton took over for Gino Wickman, it was his turn to go. And then I stepped into the role in 2020, and it's been a ride ever since.
So a couple of things I want to highlight on. You mentioned that you started your entrepreneurial journey not only at a time that, if you could predict the future, may have deterred those, but definitely one of the more trying times in the U.S. economy. What is it about entrepreneurship? And you said a quote about mix between ego and ignorance that, I guess the thought is there's never a right time to start, or the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. So How do you communicate the fear of the unknown when you're doing your leadership, to just say, hey, dive in, right? Like, the best way to confront the problem is to start confronting it. Like,
That's
what's
right.
your approach on that mindset? Getting started, making the jump.
Yeah, it's funny because I was having this conversation with my wife about my children. One in college, about to graduate, one about to go in. And there's no good time to start, but you don't learn anything unless you are in action, unless you are experiencing something for yourself. And so I just always think that in times where it's hard, in times where people are like, why would you take that risk? It's all theoretical. It's not real. It's fake.
Mm.
My dad always taught me, the definition of fear is false events appearing real. They're like, yep. So let's just go find out what the reality is. And when I started my company then in 2007, we got competitors calling us saying, you can't do what you're doing, because we were picking up the phone, we were calling people, we were emailing people, we were getting meetings. Drug products were still being produced, and our competitors were just, kind of shelled up.
Mm.
And we took market share when everyone else was shaking in fear. And these businesses were around for quite a long time. They're actually part of the cohort. Our competitors were people that I went to picnics with when I was 10 years old,
Oh,
because my dad
wow.
was in the business. And so I knew all of the competitors, and they were kind of just comfortable, and they were filled with fear in that moment in time. So we were able to take market share quite quickly. And I think in all times where during COVID, who knows if we're going to get into a recession now, but those are the moments in time where the best get better.
Right.
Where I always say, and maybe ticks a few people off when I say it, is that there's no recession for the capable.
I think
And if
that's
you're,
incredibly true. Just from looking at the short span of history, look at, you could date back to the Great Depression, right? It was a terrible time, and many people lost their lives and jobs and unemployment. But then look what happened the golden age afterwards, and then the .com
yeah,
bubble. Look how many people that are billionaires that didn't have anything until that period of time, and some people lose, but then winners really come to the top.
Yeah. And I think about Stockdale's paradox a lot, that Jim Collins writes about, with really accepting the brutal facts of reality, and at the same time having the undying faith that in the end you will prevail. And so if you have that mindset, if you can hold those two things in your brain together, like, yeah, it's kind of terrible right now, and we're going to win, and we're just going to keep at it, and we're going to keep showing up every day, you're going to take market share, you're going to get what you want from your business.
It fires me up to hear you mention that. I subscribed to your newsletter, so I saw that was a recent piece of content, and I'm looking down at my leg because I have it tattooed on myself. So James is a cousin of my grandfather. They were Naval Academy. My grandfather, great uncle, and his cousin James all graduated from Naval Academy. And I wasn't familiar with him necessarily until I was in the session room, one of my first EOS, and they're like, "Oh, are you related?" I was like, "I don't know." So then I
And it turns out you are.
turns out I called my grandfather, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I believe he was a little older, and I think we have the same grandfather or something like that." And I was like, "What in the world?" Or
That's
great grandfather?
amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But to that, I can't agree more. I think that people think that hard times are an indication of failure or something going wrong. But if you would take James as an example, 7.5 years at the Hanoi Hotel,
Mm-hmm.
the POW camp, and coming back, and people not knowing, his wife Sybil not knowing if he would ever come back, if he was alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the instance of, it's like how you deal with problems that matters, not what happens to you, but how you react, as a principle
Yep.
of stoicism. So how do you incorporate, retaining faith that you'll prevail in the end, confronting the most brutal facts of your current reality, like that idea of stoicism, with keeping that very tight knit, cultural, human centric approach? Because I think a common misnomer of stoicism is that they don't feel emotions, but I
Yep.
think that you and I would agree that it's wrong. So how do you maintain that logical approach, but also have the empathetic connection with others?
So the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that is EOS at its core When we talk about delegate and elevate, and Dan Sullivan has a great term called unique ability. And it really stems from the idea that you are the only one like you that has ever existed and ever will. And so you are unique in this very point in time. And when you go through life and you think of other people in those terms, you're the only one like you're the only one like you that has ever existed, and you're the only one like you that ever will. You then are just simply having this conversation of how do I help you, the unique you, get what you want from your life and from your business. And when we talk about core values are what are drawing those people to that organization. Then we have our core focus, that purpose, cause, or passion. We have a purpose of helping entrepreneurs live their EOS life. And so these core values fit people who think and believe the way we do, who share those core values, who are on the same mission as we are, helping other entrepreneurs live their EOS life. That starts to create this filtering and guiding mechanism where you then have a culture. And then, of course, we can take that all the way down to the ground to an accountability chart and what your role within the organization is and what you're expected to deliver to the organization. And you're just matching up what this unique human is put on this earth to do with what we want to do and get done. And we meet in the middle. And it's very, very good as long as that stays the case. But people grow and change over time, as do businesses. And so if you can keep that going over a long period of time, you've got a culture that is quite healthy. You have a business that performs, and then it changes. And it takes a lot of work and effort to keep it there. So hopefully that answers your question. So from an empathy perspective, I'm just looking at the individual, the team, and then the company, and then everyone else we touch and come into contact with.
Yeah, Stephen Covey, one of his highly effective habits is to seek first to understand. So it's understanding what are the values of both the company culture and the individual themselves. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great answer. Something else that you mentioned is when you started business, you started with your brother. Mm-hmm. And when you were bumping into competitors because of your father's career, you've known some of them since you were in grade school.
Yeah.
What's unique about family business versus you've also been on the other end of the spectrum, I think, with private equity, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
From the hyper close and personal with family to, mm-hmm. hey, this is more analytical. We have quants and analysts on PE. Mm-hmm. What are some of the key similarities and differences, at least in your experience?
Yeah, and I'll kind of go back to what I said earlier, is that every human is a unique individual, and that's that. And so whether they're family, genetically related to you or not, it really doesn't make much of a difference. Oh. And it's only for a time. Most people think that when you create a family business, this is a life sentence. And then because of that, they're not really willing to be uncomfortable, because the thought of, having a direct, open and honest conversation with a family member feels permanent, because they're going to be your brother forever. And so you just end up with this people not being quite open, honest, transparent, and vulnerable with one another to say, are we truly and really on the same mission? Were we truly put on this earth to accomplish this mission? Do we truly share these core values? And so there's a lot of assumptions that are just baked into those family businesses, that because you share the last name, you automatically share these core values. And because you share the last name, you automatically are on the same mission and have the same purpose, which is just simply not true. And so when you're thinking about how do I unlock the capability of each individual human to set them up to accomplish their purpose here on earth, then you're okay having open and honest conversations. You're okay entering the danger, because it isn't necessarily permanent.
So it goes back to your definition of fear, right? It's like sometimes people, because there's that emotional attachment outside, like the relationship outside, it's like the same tool and solution applies to both. Like having open and honest conversations, like that solves for, any fear that might exist on, selling. It's like, don't have fear with anyone, whether it's someone you never met before or someone you've known your whole life. You have to communicate the same way consistently. That's what I'm hearing from you. And I think that's It's incredibly spot on. I'm going to switch the topic a little bit.
Sure.
What was it like, if you can remember, your first ever session as an implementer versus now?
I remember it quite well.
What was it like the first time? And like,
Yeah.
what was going on in your head and your feelings, and like, how did you prepare for it? And then looking back, like, what are some of the things you learned from then to now?
Oh. So I'm going to protect all the names except my own. And I'm going to leave out some details because I don't want them to know they've been outed. Okay, so I had no intention on becoming an implementer, right? And so in those days at QCE, when you became an implementer, you'd stand up, you'd share your story, you'd sit down, and implementers would tear off pieces of paper and give you feedback to your story. Like, it was just why, like, you just felt like, what in the world's happening? Like, all these people are being open and honest with me. Like, this is not good. But one of those slips of paper was like, hey, I have a lead for you. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And so a few, like 6 months later or whatever, she calls me. She's like, hey, do you want to do this? I'm like, well, what? I don't even know what to do. And she was like, just go do it, Mark. Stop talking. Just go do it. So I just obsessed over, we have focus day videos and 90-minute meeting videos. So my first session was technically a 90-minute meeting with this team. And that was actually part of the first time I did that. I'm like, oh, I love this. This is just great. Booked the focus day. And so I go into the first full day session. A focus day is 7 hours plus or minus 1. At least it should be. And I didn't know anything other than the words to say. And we have our guides, and that's about it.
Right.
And remember, too, I was self-implementing here. So I sat in their shoes. I've been through my own focus day. I've done a focus day for companies I own. This is the first time that I did it with a company I didn't own. 16 people show up.
16?
16 people show up to a focus day.
Okay.
And in those days, you would call your coach or you'd call Gino, but prior to, like, hey, I'm about to do this. What do I do?
Yeah.
But we didn't talk about that. I don't even remember what we were talking about. What wasn't that? It wasn't 16 people showing up. And so I just didn't know what I was doing. I go in there, you got 16 people. And later, how we think about this is any number over 7 people, you got to add an hour to the focus day or any session. So if you got a bigger team, if you've got 12 people on a team.
So 17-hour session.
Yes. So that's the way it went. The accountability chart in my very first focus day took until 9 p.m. It was a 16-hour focus day. It took twice as long as it should have. And, as I reflect on that, as you kind of bring that back to me, I really did know the words to say. And I had no fear going into that room. I had a 300-person company that I still owned and ran at the time, and this was sort of playtime for me. So I followed the process as close as I possibly could, but I didn't know how to select clients. I didn't know how to coach them going into the session. That, hey, you probably want to think about bringing 5 people who are going to run this company, not 16 people who are going to run this company. And so in my facilitation skills, I just, they were very just budding at that moment in time. And so we got there. We finally got the accountability chart. It was a family business. There were significant issues. There is a story that I tell that I'm not going to tell here, but I tell to implementers about my first level 10 meeting observation with this particular client. But I would just say, when you're an implementer, you do become a little bit of a mental health worker. And people try to make you marriage counselor. They tried to make you family counselor. They tried to put you in these situations, and you inevitably walk into these very uncomfortable situations. And our job is teacher, facilitator, coach, and we are entering the danger. We are getting people to produce results by removing those unsaid barriers to their performance. And sometimes it is a marriage issue if it's a husband and wife team or team members that are there. And this happens more often than we think. And so to navigate that and be able to simply increase team health and quarterback what's going on in those leadership teams is something I had to learn the hard way. And I would just add that EOS, and when Gino created it, a lot of the concepts came from his dad, Floyd Wickman. And he has a pedagogy, and he would never use the word pedagogy. That's I'm using that one, which essentially means this is our method of teaching. It is time-spaced learning. We teach clients and we teach implementers we teach you enough to be dangerous. You go out in the world and you try it. You bump your head, you skin your knee, you learn by doing. You come back to us, we clean you up a little bit, we band you up, put a Band-Aid on it, and, kiss you goodbye, just like my mom would. Well, not really. She'd get out of here. She was a nurse, so she had no sympathy for blood.
But she was exposed to real injuries, and she can identify which ones.
Don't worry.
Yeah. Are you hurt or injured? Hey, I know you're hurt.
Right. But that's the pedagogy that we have is you learn by doing, and that's the way to make permanent, lasting change in an organization, and how an implementer learns too. And so that was my first focus there.
It sounds like learn by doing is part of your genetic makeup, because obviously with your beginning stages of entrepreneurship and things like that, you just kind of dove in there. Question on leadership: what commonalities or similarities do you see with leadership, the different roles, whether it's with EOS and taking the role as an implementer, or with, scaling 300 plus people in your organization in 9 companies? What leadership skills translate to your personal and family life, and why do those skills translate?
That's a great question. I've always been someone who really just inspires other people to take action. Most other people. And I've done Ironmans, I've done marathons, I've done quite a bit of physical pursuit type stuff. I lead by example, and so I never really ask anyone to do something I'm unwilling or haven't done already myself. So I try to lead from the front as much as I possibly can, take all the bullets when necessary. And when you ask the question, how does that translate to home? I'm not really sure that it does quite one-to-one. It's really always been who I am, but at home, in some instances, my son will dive in, take action, he'll follow from time to time. But my daughters, my wife, they're sort of like, oh, that's work dad, it's home dad. But I'm kind of the same everywhere. It just lands a little bit different. It's different context.
No, that's an honest and fair answer. I think anything other than that may be trying to stretch. Core values are supposed to be uncovered, not fabricated. And
right.
So I want to touch base a little bit on the athletic pursuits. You said you've done marathons, and you said Ironmans, some pretty crazy endurance type things. What similarities for preparing and training for those types of pursuits? Right? Because you can't, I would say not can't, but even the best ultra runners like David Goggins, his first run when he was 300 pounds with the anticipation of joining the Navy SEALs, we had to lose 60 pounds in 2 months. He only made it a quarter mile before he was done the first time. So it's hard to do off the couch, but how do you structure or go about training for these pursuits while you juggle family, while you juggle business? It's something that I think is an interesting correlation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when you think about those endurance sports, and you're really just making yourself really, really uncomfortable by choice. You are choosing to do things that very few people are willing to put themselves through. And you're doing it willingly. You're doing it enthusiastically. And maybe the first few times you don't know necessarily, and it does come back to ignorance and ego, oh, I can do that. And then you do it, it's terrible. You think you might die. And then you're like, I can do better next time. So you're always in competition with yourself. We have a core value at EOS, grow or die. And I've been that way since I was born, basically. I would just go do it. Okay, that was terrible. I thought I was going to die. It was boring. But I can do better next time. And so I come back at it, maybe train a little bit different, tweak and hone and refine that training schedule, and then go back after it. And so I just keep doing this over and over and over again, whether it's sports or whether it's business or family things or whatever it might be. Just stay in it. Doesn't really matter if it's hard. Dan Sullivan says the world was not designed with me in mind.
That's an interesting
So,
fact.
like you just got to stick in it. And if you're going to get what you want, and in my case, it's just to get a little bit better and to train my mental fortitude to be able to do uncomfortable things for an uncommon amount of time. Because if you think about the most successful people in the world, that's what they do. They just stick with something for a tremendous amount of time, whether it's easy or whether it's hard. And endurance sports like that produce that mental capability for you to just keep going.
So it's the exposure effect. So the more you expose yourself to uncomfortable things, the more you confront fear, the smaller it becomes. The less discomfort, the more room for growth. One thing you mentioned, and I had to write this quote down, is training yourself to do uncomfortable things for an uncommon amount of time. Mm-hmm. I find the older I get, the more the ego and ignorance of putting timelines on things. So I love the quote. I don't know who said it. It's if you'll be disappointed by what you accomplish in a year, but you'll be shocked at what you can accomplish in 10.
Yeah. I think that was Bill Gates.
Was it?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Bill Gates.
Who he was quoting, I don't really know, but I know he said it.
It's like if you're familiar with the show The Office, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
That's right.
No, but what is it when whether it's your own life or your EOS, the organization, or clients in a session room, that you find to be the most rewarding on helping them to both get quarterly rocks that are chef's kiss and a BHAG and to land at both? Because I find that sometimes with very human experiences, getting that 30,000 foot view and being able to have both in the line of sight is both incredibly important for vision building, but also sometimes difficult, right? Because by the nature of having a 10-year goal, it's supposed to be audacious and hairy and scary. So how do you help people to say, hey, we're going to run 26 miles and it's going to be 1 mile at a time?
Yeah. And you break that down even further, right? When we're first working with a team and we're teaching them the concept of rocks, these 90-day goals, these priorities, it is a little bit of a setup, right? Because they think the goal is the rock. That's not really and the first time we expect it to be less than 50% completion the first time they do this. Sorry, I just let a little secret slip.
Oh no, I haven't heard that before, but that's gold.
Oh yeah, we don't expect them to finish most of their rocks the first time we set them in a focus day. Now, our standards go up over time to what we're coaching a team towards 80% completion then from there on out. And 80% is selected purposely. That's not 100%, right?
Yep.
But the real thing we're looking for is to get them into the habit of the level 10 meeting. To come together the same day, the same time, with the same agenda, to start a meeting on time and to end a meeting on time for most people is just like a concept that they've never experienced. And I certainly didn't prior to EOS. That's the discipline. So when we think about, okay, we're going to train you to run a marathon. Well, the first thing I need to do is get you up in the morning. So you asked earlier, how do I fit all my training and everything in? I'm at the gym and home usually before people are awake. So I can pack a 24-hour container quite tightly. I don't like to be too tightly scheduled. I leave a lot of things off my calendar from time to time. I kind of go in fits and spurts there, but I get up early and I eat the frog.
Eat the frog.
Just do the thing you don't want to do, get it out of the way, and then if you can add to it, then everything's bonus. We're doing the same thing with a leadership team. We're getting them out of bed, we're getting their running shoes on, and we're getting them out the door to the gym. The goal of being able to run a mile like Goggins was able to do maybe his first time, that's not even what we're thinking about. We're just thinking about the level 10. We set the goal of the rocks for them to have some direction to why we're executing, but it's really the level 10 meeting. Get that right. And it's kind of like riding a bike. You're all wobbly and weird in the beginning. It feels uncomfortable and unnatural. But 3-4 times week after week, it starts to create this compound interest to it, where all of a sudden the 50% completion on your rocks is not nearly as good. So you're aiming for 80%, and then you're doing level 10, level 10, level 10, and all of a sudden your rocks, they get smarter, they get a little bit bigger, right? Because you're more capable. You're building that muscle. And then eventually you're setting rocks that are what you used to be able to do in a year or two, probably closer to 3. You're now doing in 90 days. And over time, then what you're accomplishing in 1 year is just out of the realm of possibility of what you could do when you started. Then the same is true for the 3-year picture and the 10-year target. I would add to that, when we initially in a vision building day 1, when they're setting their first 10-year target, the idea of their 10-year target is just so, it feels like they're at the edge of what's possible because they haven't experienced that incremental compounding over time. And so we usually find around year 18 months in or so of the cadence, the pulse of the level 10 meeting, around that time, their 10-year target or their core target, depending on what time frame they chose, feels too small because they made that when they were 60 pounds overweight and out of shape. And so the thought of doing that was, this is going to be hard.
This brings a whole new definition to the theory of relativity that Einstein came up with. Mm-hmm. Because like an object in motion, it tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. So what you're doing is you're speeding up momentum with these weekly feedback loops, and then the weekly ties into the quarterly, so that you're essentially pulling the future like closer, but not necessarily, because if you think of it as if they're both sitting still, like this date's here and it's static, and then where you're at today is static. But then you put this momentum with implementing the tools, or they just get better, more efficient with time, faster. Time slows down when you're moving fast. And I think that's kind of, it goes back to optimizing human energy, right? Like,
that's right.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Time flies when you're having fun and you're taking advantage of compound interest. Now, people will ask us, well, why don't you have daily huddles? Because if you're taking advantage of this compound interest, why don't you have daily huddles? And the answer is, we've tried them. And people don't get out of bed when they think they have to do something every single day. So we're trying to get the most amount of results in the least amount of time in a weekly level 10 meeting, starting with the leadership team, then throughout the business, is more than what most people are willing to embark upon. So there are exceptions where they're like, oh, we've been doing a weekly meeting and we want to do daily huddle. We don't recommend daily huddles because most people will not do it. It would be like, hey, we're going to go train on a marathon. We're going to run 18 miles tomorrow morning. And you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so most people don't. Our target market, a company of 10 to 250 employees, the leader, the entrepreneur who's just hitting the ceiling and they're at their wits' end trying to get what they want out of this thing, the idea of a daily huddle is just too much. So that's why we don't do it.
It reminds me of a program called 75 Hard with Andy Frisella. I'm sure you've heard of it. I see you smile. But that, because you're talking about building mental fortitude and toughness by exposing yourself to uncomfortable things, and that's sort of the shtick behind the program. But when I think about how I have a specialized doctor for like performance, anti-aging, whatever, a health coach, and he asked me questions on, do you work out X times per week? Do you get X amount of protein or rest per week on average, like weekly averages, which sounds more like the level 10 cadence versus the 75 hard, which is you must do these 10 repeatable tasks every day. And one of the questions I had for you is, do you have a daily playbook, or do you structure your day? It doesn't have to be just for training or for life, but do you try to say like, hey, I have like these things I want to accomplish in a week, and then when they fit? Or do you have like a pretty regimented every day?
The answer to that is yes, all of them. So the way I personally do this, and this is not EOS, and so I'll just share how I personally organize my month, my week, my day, is, visionaries sometimes have rocks, sometimes don't. And so why do we say that? Well, the reason it's just sometimes is because some visionaries just need a lot of free thinking space inside of an organization, but I haven't really found any visionary who doesn't have at least some personal rocks. And so I do too. So I have my 90-day goals. I actually have a personal VTO. So I have my 3 personal 1-year plan goals. I have a personal 3-year picture, a lifetime wish list, and core habits and those types of things. And I have a 10-year target. And so I take that 3-year, I create my 1 year, then I create my rocks. And then out of the rocks, I have 3 priorities for the month that are stepping stones toward some of those rocks. Then I have weekly priorities. I have 3 weekly priorities of what I want to accomplish. And then I do the same thing on a daily basis. So what are my 3 daily priorities that will set me up to achieve my weekly goals, which will set me up to my monthly, which then filter into my rocks. And I plan and put that on my calendar. And that's how I do that. And so I use Google Calendar. And so inside of that, you can do some formatting. And so I do the writing there and recap the day. And so I'm up at 5:30. I go to the gym right away. Then I do a power up exercise where I'm reviewing the day's priorities. I'm reviewing what I've got going on in my calendar. And sometimes I do this on paper. Like for whatever reason, I switch between paper and technology all the time.
Keeps it fresh.
Yeah, it keeps it fresh. I'm always like, maybe this is better, maybe that's better. I don't know. So, but I keep doing it, just different modalities. So that's how I do it. And then at the end of the day, I power down. Did I accomplish the 3 things? And then I set the 3 goals for the next day and make sure that they're in line with my weekly. And so I just do that on my calendar.
It's the blend between visionary and engineer, right? Like you're engineering the vision.
I am.
So
for myself, and now we don't do that at EOS Worldwide. We don't have monthly goals or weekly, so we run EOS as pure as we possibly can.
Well, I have a secret part of the segment I started doing, and it's called Leave a Question, Ask a Question.
Yeah.
And the last guest that I had on, this is going to be interesting for you, has a question for you. Didn't know I was interviewing you, so it's a surprise. And that question is, what is one thing that you have been procrastinating that you need to start doing this weekend?
Ooh, this weekend. It's a really hard question. I'm going to sit on procrastination for just a minute.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was interesting for you, because I would not put Mark and procrastination in the dictionary next to each other.
Yeah. And so I look at procrastination and perfectionism as 2 sides to the same coin. Like, why do we procrastinate? Why do I not do things that I know I need to do or want to do? Well, a couple things. If you're familiar with Kolbe, my Kolbe profile is 2-2-10-3. So I'm a 10 quick start. So I just kind of do things and I think about them after I'm done or in the middle of it, or like, how did I get here? Whose dumb idea was this? So I kind of move through pretty quickly. And so I procrastinate on things where I can't do it perfectly, and I think it needs to be done perfectly, or I am not yet sold on I want to do it. So those are the things that are in my bottom 2 quadrants of delegate and elevate, things that I don't like but I'm good at, or things that I don't like and I'm not good at. I tend to procrastinate on those for very long periods of time. So it might be like cleaning out the basement or dropping stuff off at Goodwill. I usually try to make my kids do that, but they don't always do what I ask.
That's a tough one to delegate sometimes.
Right. So I probably have a list of those things that I am procrastinating on. So I do have something to drop off at Goodwill that I'm like, I don't really want to.
If anything, we can take something off of your to-do list that's painful.
Yeah, because now I'm going to have to go do it.
I made you confront an uncomfortable thing.
Yep.
Mission accomplished. So the other side of that coin, Mark, is what question do you have for the next anonymous guest?
My question for them will be, how long will you wait until you demand the best for yourself?
Spoken like a true 10 quick start, right? Like what's stopping you from taking action? And yeah, no, that's interesting.
How long will you wait? And that's a question that comes from Epictetus, who really just posed that question, like, how long are you going to wait until you demand the best for yourself? Most people, it is about procrastination, but the first part of that is, what's the definition of the best for me right now? Right. And then saying, okay, well, what's preventing me? What's stopping me? What are those fake things stories that I'm telling myself that are saying, well, I can't, and here's why. We are just, reason-making machines. So I usually find that question usually gets people moving.
Well, you're IDSing what's the obstacle between your purpose.
Yep.
I think that question is really the root of that, because with stoicism, it's like, sure, endure discomfort, but do so voluntarily and make sure there's a purpose behind it. Like,
Sure.
If you're just sitting on a nail and the answer is because someone told you to, it's like not a good reason.
That's not a good reason.
No, but if you're out about at 5:30 a.m. training for a marathon, it's because you made a commitment to run a marathon. That's a good reason, So it's like, what's the reason and what's the amount of pain? That's a thoughtful question.
Yes. And in my case, I've run a marathon without training, and I know what that's like.
What?
I have.
Holy
that was
crap.
a bad idea. Super bad idea. My toenails fell off. I mean, I couldn't walk for almost a month. It felt like it was probably a week or two, but it was just a bad idea.
Boy. Yeah. Prior planning, 6 Ps.
Yep. All
right. I guess the last question I have for you, Mark, is what is your 10-year target? What's your personal, not like EOS's, but your, like on your VTO, your BHAG? And how'd you land there?
Yeah. And that goal that I'm about to share with you was when I asked myself, how long will I wait until I demand the best for myself? And I had this 10-year target is the reason I became Visionary at EOS Worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I want to help 1 million people live a life they love. That's my BHAG. Now it's a 25-year target. It's not a 10-year. And I just think that people deserve to shed themselves of all the things that are holding them back and just go be who you were meant to be. Become your 6-year-old self. And so I define like the life you want to live is really you at 6. Not that everyone has like a perfect...
Sure.
But their environment. But most people, when they're about that age, their brain is just totally lit up and they're free to be themselves without holding back. And so that's really what I'm set on a mission to do. And we know that at EOS Worldwide, if we can get 100,000 companies running on EOS by 2035, that's 5 leadership team members. The average company size is 47. So that's 47 times 100,000 who are going to have the opportunity to go through Delegate and Elevate, to create a personal plan, to begin then crafting a life that they love. And so I'm just putting notches in the belt.
It goes back to that average 9 out of 23, 300 batting average you see in the Hall of Fame. If 40% of that 4.7 million, you got your goal crushed. And I love the mathematical reasoning behind the reverse engineering too. Mark, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Everyone listening, I hope that we delivered on the promise to share valuable insights for your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. And remember, we're all just 6-year-olds who get a little bit older. So live the life that enhances your creativity and lights you up. Thank you.